Hello, welcome to Credit Careercast, brought to you by Highako. Today, Bob Shultz, Michelle Herman, and Melanie Morcelle bring their extensive knowledge to talk about the use and abuse of collection agencies. Let's get right into this great conversation.
Hey everybody, we've got a great topic today. We're going to talk about collection agencies, the kind of the use and abuse of collection agencies. For starters, Melanie, there's hundreds of agencies out there, and a credit manager has to choose, who are they going to work with. What do you think the best criteria would be, or how a credit manager evaluates all the agencies that are calling them typically every week? How do they choose one? What do you think?
Yeah, every week, every day, right? Multiple calls. And, there's a few points that are most important. First, the collection professionals that are employed at the agency should be certified, should have a formal certification. It's also very helpful if the agency pays for that certification and then recertifies them with refreshers, right? And then also it should be a portable certification so that if they should leave that agency and go work for someone else, they take that certification with them. The reason why I always thought that was so important, Bob, is because that's a true investment in your employee. And with the thousands of agencies out there, some great, some not so great, that to me was always very important. If it's an international organization and they need bilingual, multilingual, having a collection staff that has the native language is also something that's very important to look at. French Canadian is very different than European France, and when you're calling a debtor, they know the difference, and then that will sidetrack it and distract from collection. And then also being licensed and understanding who their attorney partners are, if you're going to need attorney intervention at some point. And then most important for me, simply because I've been in the industry for over 20 years, is the agency provides the company with an educational resource. I think that's very important, just complimentary, frankly, so that you're a partner with that department or those departments. You're an extension of that department. So having an educational opportunity together, I think, is also very important. Those are the key areas that I've always focused on.
What do you think, Michelle?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with Melanie. And one of the things that comes to my mind instantly is industry knowledge. And I think maybe, Melanie, that's kind of what you're referring to is our world is really so unique. And of course, we all know you can't really go to college except for UCLA Extension to get any education on what is it that we do. And you're just blindly making phone calls trying to collect money, and you don't understand what the industry is about. And I think even a step further is the vertical market, right? If you're collecting in food services or insurance or hospitality or construction, they all have their unique proclivities where if you don't understand what those proclivities are, you're not going to be an effective collector, or you're going to waste a lot of time trying to get to the bottom of the heap. So I think understanding what the industry is about, that it is so different from consumer collections, and understanding the industry that you're in and what are the factors that are at play, I think are huge.
Yeah, I think you guys hit the high points in terms of industry knowledge, giving back something in terms of having well-trained, educated people doing the collections. The other thing, I've always looked for that, an advisory role from a collection agency about, things that they notice about my internal process, and so on. So communication is very important. And so if I was choosing an agency, I would want to understand what's the communication between the two of us. How do I refer an account over there? What insights do I have, and what their collectors are doing, so that I can kind of monitor the progress. The other really important thing for me has always been an agency that's flexible in terms of how I want them to approach my account. There are some referrals you make, in the future, you may want to do business with them again. And so it's a kind of a lighter touch. Others, you want them to be very aggressive. And I've worked with agencies where I'll just tell them, turn up or down the volume, and they're very flexible with that. I've also experienced walking around inside an agency and listening where their collectors were literally screaming at one of the customers we had, literally screaming. That's unacceptable. It's
Right.
legally abusive, and it's an unacceptable thing where, I don't want our company represented that way. So those are, I agree with everything you said. Those are some of the other things I look for. One of the things I've noticed as a consultant for many years, going into companies, and working in the aftermath of a predecessor, is that a lot of credit managers just kind of suck the life out of an open balance before they send it to an agency. And to me, that's really not the way to go. What do you guys think in terms of how would somebody develop a policy in terms of how I use an agency, when I make a referral, et cetera? What do you think an example would be of the best practice there? Melanie?
Sure. Well, that's something I always recommend my client partners, to have a credit policy. And if they don't have a formal credit policy within their organization, I work with them to develop one, because that's very, very, very necessary. But as far as, not, what did you say, sucking the life out of it, quite often what I found, or historically what I found, is that, at times credit managers can feel like they failed if they have to turn it over to an agency, right? And that's not the case at all. That debtor just needs perhaps a stepped up demand of some sort, right? However, that's a hurdle, that collection agencies for years have had to overcome, and educate their clients so that they are truly an extension of their department and their partner. So less threatening, not, we're here to make you successful. And Michelle, I remember you and I talking about this, using an agency and having a rhythmic time on when you place it allows the credit managers to focus on their KPIs, right? And other areas that are more important. So having that partnership is key. But I think really historically was the threat of, oh, I failed, I have to turn it over to a collection agency. I've heard that quite a bit, and that was a hurdle that I was able to overcome, but it still sits there a little bit today. A rhythmic, regular placement is the absolute best way to go.
And I think you're right that there is this personal sense of I have failed, my team has failed, we have to give up and give it to an agency. And people forget that, they're really not weighing. They're like, oh, the agency is going to take 20% or 25% or 30% of the receivable. And they're looking at the cost of that versus, hello, having your own people sit there and hammer away at these people, it isn't really necessarily any cheaper than that. And I think, like you said, if you actually have a process in place where you have a policy where it says at X days outstanding, after X number of attempts, then we place it with a third party, then you've got a process that makes sense. And then your collectors can actually operate in an environment that they can communicate easily to the customer. And once your salespeople know that too. Listen, this is how it works. After X many attempts, you're 90 days past due. This is our process. This is what we do. It's no offense to you. This is just simply how we operate to maximize our own resources internally.
Yeah, just to elaborate on some, I put it in very simple terms. If you have a policy and it's very predictable and it's a fair policy and it's consistent, then everyone knows when the train has left the station. And once it's left the station, it's out of the reach of your salespeople to try to influence. Don't press them too hard, just write it off, et cetera. I think a lot of the motive of credit managers that I've seen that keep things too long is fear. They're afraid, hey, I'm managing this credit department. My boss is looking. My boss is going to wonder, why am I taking a good segment of our receivables and shuffling it off to a third party? What's wrong with me? And I think the points you've raised are spot on, that's not it at all. It's a matter of managing your priorities and deploying your people in the most effective way. Why would you have them work and work and work an aged small balance when you have a 0 to 30 balance, 61 to 90 balance that's really going to drive your cash flow? That's the way to deploy your people. What's the objective? You're trying to bring money into your company. So having them, work on lower priority things that probably you're going to end up writing off or giving to a collection agency anyway, that's really a mistake. The other way to look at it in just very plain terms, what is a collection agency? It's contract labor. It's contract labor. And guess what? You're only paying them if they collect money.
Right.
If they don't collect,
There
you've
you
got
go.
people working on good stuff that makes a difference, and you're not paying anything. And then you have the free demand period. And in my experience, a high percentage of payments are made in that free demand, and then you don't pay anybody anything, but you get your money. The other thing, and Michelle, you touched on this, it's the change of stationery. You can call and call and call. They're never going to do anything about it. I don't have to pay them. Oh, I'll wait another month. But when they see that change of stationery and they realize that, this may be visible to the outside world on the bureau reports, that really drives payments. So the change of stationery, in my view, is a big deal. And credit managers need to understand all these things. And to your point, don't be afraid to refer it. It's good business. It makes sense. And you have to explain this to your boss. So anyway, I think people ought to think that way. Does anybody have any examples of when a collection agency has just, really a horrible example of abuse of their customers, or things that a credit manager should be aware that all agencies aren't the same, that some of them are, can do pretty unethical things. Any examples, Michelle?
Well, first, I was going to say, for all of those millennial credit managers out there who might be listening, that we should clarify that when you say change of stationery, we mean letterhead on a piece of paper.
Right.
I keep thinking they're thinking of stationery or something.
What is stationery?
Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry.
It's so funny, but it's no true, right? It's just a different approach, and having somebody contact you from an outside entity or different entity, that's a horrifying thought. I mean, when you think about I'm sure all of us at one point, when you mail, when you move, or you have different things that happen, and all of a sudden some bill that you just missed somehow ends up at a collection agency, and you get that notice in the mail. It's well, maybe just because we're in credit, but to me, it's like horrific. It's a horrifying moment of, oh my God, someone else knows about this and it's gotten this far. And what are the ramifications of this? It does strike fear in the heart. And I think that is one of the benefits of having it be placed with an outside agency, is that those people getting that letter, getting that email, they are also consumers, right? So they know what that means in their own personal life. And so when you get it, even though it's a business transaction, it still is a weighty transaction, and it makes people take a step back and think, oh dear God, what is happening? We better pay attention to this. So I think it ups the urgency. But yeah, I was, thinking about unethical agencies. Oh my gosh. I actually started really in this business. I was in Florida, and Florida was like, every intersection, there were like 4 collection agencies on every corner. It was incredible. So the stories that I heard were just amazing about things that would go on. And, things have really changed a lot. I mean, back in the day, there was really a lot of shifty things going on. We could probably do a whole entire podcast about that. One of the things that just comes to mind, I was just doing some research the other day. One of my customers, which I could name because technically they actually went to federal prison, but they were a credit manager, and they decided, they saw all this cash coming in, they saw all this cash going out to a third-party agency, how much money these agencies were making, how little it was being monitored. And so he set up his own collection agency, and he started making placements to his own collection agency. And he and his wife built a huge house, and they basically embezzled $1.5 million from the company. And it took him years to find this out. And it's, this is where the checks and balances come into play, is that it's so easy for unethical things to happen, especially in a fast-paced world where just, you're not monitoring every transaction. You just don't have time. It's everything's a rush. So it does happen. And when people think, oh, we don't need to be certified. Oh, well, we don't need to check on our agencies. Yeah, you do. things
Mhm.
really do happen. There are bad things that can happen, and people can end up in jail.
Yeah, I think the certification and just making sure you're dealing with somebody legitimate is so important. In my experience, I've had, the two things that come to mind. There's others, but the two that come to mind is I got a call, and it happened to be in Florida, Michelle. Nothing against Florida, but
Well,
it
I'm
was
struggling here. I'm in Florida right now.
okay. All right. Well, anyway,
Melanie,
it's
as
an
she's sitting in
agency.
Florida.
It's an agency that will go unnamed in Florida, and I get the call, and the first thing the guy says is he says, "Hey Bob, do you hear that growling in the background?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "That's our collectors. We keep them in cages." And I thought, yeah, that's really not somebody I want to deal with.
Yeah.
The other one is I got a call from a guy, and I won't go through the whole story in the interest of time, but the bottom line was that he offered me a bribe. And what he suggested I do is to send a claim, which they would collect, some amount, and they would report that they collected a lesser amount. They would be paid, their commission on the full amount, and they would give me a kickback.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and I was so horrified. I tried to get the return phone number and asked him question. Okay, well, I'm not interested for myself in fear I was being recorded. But my company loves discounts.
No discounts.
Yeah, and I took all his information, which was all false, but I reported it to the FBI. I went into my boss and I said, "What happened?" I reported it to the FBI. I thought his head was going to explode that I had actually done that. But
Wow.
those things do
Wow.
happen. And I was thinking of the poor person who is a credit manager in a small company, probably not making a lot of money,
Mhm.
that has bills and kids and would be attracted to that type of thing. And now they're an embezzler and all kinds of other things. So you have to. That's just a poster child for why you want to deal with a legitimate agency, and you need to vet them carefully.
Yes.
So let's get back to kind of the mechanics here. I'm interested. I'll go back to you again, Michelle or Melanie. When do you think it's appropriate for a credit manager to actually refer an account? What type of timeline do you think is best practice?
Well, the probability of collection right at due date is under 100%. It's right around 92% right at due date, right? So the sooner it gets collected, usually what'll happen is we'll have buckets, right? We'll have age of placement buckets, perhaps along with dollar amounts. And I always say it's best, maybe you do 30, 60, 90, depending on the buckets that currently exist, right? The amount of staff you have internally, where you want them to focus on age and or dollar size, and then set up a consistent rhythm. I always say 30 days, after 30 days, but I also outsourced first party as well as third party, right? So, I also presented ourselves as part of that team, Melanie from that organization. So the earlier it's placed, the higher the probability of collection. And it significantly decreases. It goes down to 50%, right, at about 65 days, so just do the math, So what I do, though, is I'll just educate, I'll share the statistics, and then I'll allow the credit manager to make that decision. But again, that should be that policy that we talked about, right, as you set it up. But for me, best practices, if it's not collected within 30 days, and or if you have a certain bucket, maybe you want to get the aged out done, it's a partnership. So there's some different factors at play. So,
and I think
age placement and go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I think one of the things that's really important, and Melanie, I think you do a great job of this too, is that each company has their own philosophy from a sales and marketing standpoint. Where are we going? What are we trying to do? And if you don't understand what is the overarching goal of the company, you can do some real damage by placing something too soon or too late.
That's
So
right.
if you don't know, if you're not in alignment with management and understanding what are the actual, are you planning on going public in the next year? If so, you probably want to be really, really careful about what you place. But if you're not, if you're making big investments, I mean, you need to understand kind of the environment in which the company operates, and your management team needs to buy in to when are you placing and why are you placing? And you might even have different criteria for different lines of business, right?
That's right.
Depending on the industry standards and depending on what you're trying to achieve. Like if you've got a brand new product line, you might have a little bit less flexibility or more flexibility, depending on where you are kind of in the pecking order of the competition. So there's a lot of things I think that people need to consider that you can do a lot of damage, again, if you wait too long or if you place too soon. So you got to know what your world looks like.
Yeah.
I think some of it is dependent on the type of terms you have too, and normal industry payment practices. So you have to make adjustments. If you have very long terms and then somebody doesn't pay you, I think you have to crank up the volume a little bit, because the further out a receivable gets, the less likelihood of collection there is. The other thing, and it kind of ties into this, is how do you prevent the need to refer to an agency in the first place? And you can use some champions in your own company. Everybody dishes sales and credit and that relationship, but I don't see it that way. A salesperson has a vested interest in preventing this. So going to the individual has the relationship with the customer, not necessarily at the payables level, but with a buyer or a program manager or somebody at the other end. It has a vested interest in keeping things running smoothly. If you leverage those people internally to help you, to me, that really prevents a lot of referrals and misunderstandings. And the worst thing to do is to refer somebody to a collection agency without letting your salesperson know, if possible. It's like a one-handed slap. It's like the tree that falls down in the forest, nobody hears it. Why would you want to do that? I mean, you have the ability to prevent a credit hold and a referral if you just are proactive about it. And when you do refer somebody to an agency and you do stop shipping to them, what happens? Your whole cash conversion cycle is impacted. You got product in the warehouse you can't ship. You got a sales and cash forecast you can't make. So trying to keep things going and being proactive about it is very important. To Melanie's point, when you have structure, it really helps. There's advanced alerts. Wow, this is going to happen. The train's going to leave the station. So anyway, all good points. Did you have something else, Melanie, to add?
Yeah, the key is always to preserve the client's relationship with their customer, right? And as you place, you build intelligence around the health of that portfolio. And then I would always say, let's adjust the throttle, right? Maybe you don't need to place so soon, or maybe let's place a little quicker, because this, I always say we always want to make a bad payer a good payer, right? That's old language, right? And but really that's it, is to understand the health of the portfolio, and then have the flexibility. I think you mentioned that, Bob, earlier, to adjust the throttle with regard to placement. The other thing too that I'm learning over the last 10 years is just now it's all about branding, right? So the companies, the newer organizations today, right? The tech companies and other just, different industries that are of recent, they're more worried about their brand. So they'll place it actually faster because they want to keep that good payer a good payer and not get them to and that's why when I mentioned like the first party being an extension of them, their department just isn't large enough to handle that. The key is brand loyalty, and to identify, the customer and get them back on track, and or provide that intelligence to the company to say, you know what, you really shouldn't do business with this company anymore because they're really not a good customer to be to be working with, so.
I used to tell people that work for me, and this is going to sound a little odd. Nixon had a saying, something, I'll paraphrase it, like, let him hang high and swing in the wind. If you have a distribution or a dealer network, they know how vendors behave.
Yes.
And if you want to have discipline in terms of payments and so on, get a reputation that you're no nonsense. And,
that's right.
And that will filter through your entire dealer or distribution network. Just another thing to think about. Let's move on to another topic. Particularly, Melanie, you probably are best suited for this question. What does an agency need from a credit manager in order to do a good job? What should a credit manager be prepared to provide them to get best results?
Okay, well, when you place a claim, there's usually a claim placement form. Everyone has one. And it has all of the contact information, the point of contact at the company, who the debtor is, their address, all of that regular information on the placement form. But the more information, the better. Any contracts that exist, any letters of engagement, right? A credit application is key. Always try and get a credit application. Any of the invoices, the last invoices, any other invoices, and even some invoices that are not yet due are also very good to have, because you can kind of keep control over, this one is also coming up. So how am I going to approach this invoice? Because there's another one coming in another 10 days, right? The statement of account, also proof of delivery, is also very important. So, and any communication that they've had with the debtor, we get access to their system, so we can look at their notes and all of the conversations that have already taken place. So the more information, the better. Credit application and all of what I just shared. Michelle, is there anything else that you can think of?
Yeah. So one of the things that, of course, always comes to mind for me is credit report information. And it really is remarkable how things have evolved over the last many, many years. Back in the day, this kind of goes to like, why do people hang on to an account so long? Because back in the day, depending on your profit margin, the balance of the account, you wouldn't necessarily go pull a fresh credit report at that point, because it's almost like throwing good money after bad, right?
Yeah,
Because
terrific.
be really expensive. And, you really want to, you've got $100 balance, you're going to pull a credit report and spend $50 to determine if you should send that item to an agency. Why would you do that? You don't. So you hang on to it, hoping to milk every last bit of it. But now credit information is so ubiquitous. It's so easy to get. Portfolio scoring is out there, really, and that should definitely play a part in identifying, when a customer is paying everybody else on time but you, then you got to look at yourself and say, it's not the customer's not bad. It's something in our own process. Either we're not invoicing correctly, or maybe they're not getting the bill, or maybe there's a problem with the product. So having that knowledge now is easier than it's ever been before. And even on the collection agency end, an agency gets that, what does almost everybody do? They run credit reports, they do portfolio scoring all the time. So if you can understand, is this really a dispute? Is there a reason this isn't being paid? Versus these people are just deadbeats. They don't pay anybody because they're probably out of business, or maybe they're struggling from some natural disaster or catastrophe or God knows what. And I think that having access to the information has never been easier before. And the amount of people who still don't access it, it's never been cheaper. There's so many sources out there have phenomenal data. And it's just, to me, it's crazy to not leverage that in this entire process, beginning, the middle, the end.
Yeah, these are great points. Let's move on to another topic here. How does a credit manager know if an agency, once they've selected one, they're dealing with one or maybe more than one, how do they know that the agency is doing a good job for them? And if they're calibrating their referral timing, too fast or too slow, how do they evaluate, the ongoing performance of an agency? Melanie, let's start with you here.
Sure. Well, it's the percentage of recovery, right? The percentage of, how recovering. You had mentioned free demand earlier, Bob. If you have too many collecting through the free demand, right, that adjusts also, right? And then for key is to have a formal quality assurance program. So when you're interviewing what agency to use, look at how they watch the entire process. I say from cradle to grave, right? And they have a formal quality assurance program. They have a certain system of scripting that's, and the call monitoring and how they're note taking. An agency should provide access to, full access to the notes of the collection professionals. So that's really how they know whether they're doing the job. They have access to, 724 access they should have to the collection organization and their claims. They can review the notes, the percentage of recovery. And then again, like I said, it's all about the quality and the monitoring and the scoring of that quality.
Yeah, that's great. Michelle, you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in looking at those recovery rates and understanding what's the norm for your industry, right? And what's the historical trends been? What are other economic factors that are at play here? And I think this is why this job of being a credit manager is a difficult one, because of all these different factors that you really need to be evaluating. You can't just say, okay, an account hit 60 days, it goes out to an agency. Really? Well, is there some embargo that just impacted everybody? And, you need to know all these things that are going on in the world for you to really make an effective decision, because it's not just about your KPIs, getting your metrics right. It's about, what are you doing to your company? What are you doing to, what's happening in the competitive landscape? And if you don't know all those factors, you got a lot of risk there.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, and collection agencies probably won't like to hear this, but I think it's good to have more than one agency if you're a credit manager. There's some subtle competition that goes there because they know that you're sending referrals to another agency and you're comparing performance. The other thing is you may find that in certain aspects of your portfolio, one agency outperforms the other because they're just some characteristic about that agency that helps them do that. And I think that's another thing. And it's good to benchmark one against the other. And if one is not performing, then hunt around for another one and make a change. I think we're out of time here. This has been really a great discussion, I think. And I hope that credit managers that are listening to this get some good viewpoints and know how to better behave with agencies and how to better utilize them as a tool. And with that, let's close. Thank you so much, Melanie and Michelle. Great stuff.
Thank you.